I've got a confession to make. I am afraid of Hieronymus Bosch. And when I say that, I might mean that I find his paintings disturbing or scary or whatever. They often are, but I also have laughed more than once at one of his paintings. But who knows? Maybe that laughter is the result of fear. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's what I mean when I say that I'm afraid of Hieronymus Bosch. What I know I mean when I say that I'm afraid of Bosch is that I'm afraid to write about Bosch. I've been writing about art for the internet for more than a decade, and in that time, I have never even mentioned his name. And I think I can explain why. Bosch seems to paint with a visual vocabulary that I personally find impenetrable. I am unambiguously and without exception enchanted by his paintings, so it's not for lack of curiosity, it's just that he seems to paint directly from a medieval worldview that is completely alien to me. What am I supposed to do with a birdman with floppy dog ears wearing a funnel as a hat, ice skates, and delivering a note pierced by its lower beak to a group of conspirators that includes a rodent? What am I supposed to do with that? Back in 1972, an art historian named Michael Baxendall coined the term the period eye to explain how cultural factors influence what an individual finds attractive or disturbing or whatever. In other words, the way that we perceive the world comes at least in part from our experience. And Bosch's worlds, painted from his experience in medieval Europe, for me, have an impenetrable period eye. I just don't know if any amount of research can ever recover this particular period eye. I can't tell if this is supposed to be funny, or gross, or spiritual, or joyful, or disturbing, and so I've always been afraid to write about the paintings. But I'm gonna go for it anyway. I spent the summer reading and thinking about these paintings, and I've come to understand that Bosch is an incredibly important artist for right now. We may not have the same period eye, but I think that there's a connection to be made between Bosch's chaotic medieval landscapes and my internet feed. So, if I start slow, and I use the skills that I've acquired over the years, I think I can do this. I'm not going to start with the Garden of Earthly Delights, that's too overwhelming. I'm not that brave, and I'll leave that to the courageous people at Great Art Explained. Instead, we're going to start with the Temptation of St. Anthony. If this sounds like it's fun to you, please consider subscribing, okay? Deep breaths. Let's begin in my comfort zone, introducing some basic background information and focusing on some compositional analysis. This is the Temptation of St. Anthony. It's a triptych painted around 1500 by the Netherlandish painter Hieronymus Bosch for a Portuguese patron, and so that's why it's currently displayed in a museum in Lisbon. The painting itself tells the story of St. Anthony the Great. What is that? Is that a tree woman with a mummy baby? Focus. I can do this. It's just history. I know about St. Anthony. St. Anthony the Great is the one who retreated into the desert, not the one that my mom prays to whenever she's lost something. That's Anthony of Padua. This St. Anthony was born in Egypt during the 3rd century to land-owning Christian parents. When they died, he sold the land and donated the money to charity, and then went to go live in the desert by himself as a hermit. In about the year 360, a Greek writer named Athanasius of Alexandria wrote a biography of St. Anthony. And so, I read that biography in hopes that it would help me understand the painting and give me some confidence, and it did. I can connect many of the stories in that bio to scenes in this image. Overall, the biography positions Anthony as an illiterate man living a spiritual life by himself and cultivating a pure connection to the divine. Anthony tries to leave the world behind because he views it as temporary and deceptive. It's an obstacle that his soul needs to navigate before entering the afterlife. Because of this, he's often credited with being the model for a monastic life. He's basically the first monk. The whole model of retreating from the social world to live a life focused on spirituality in the Christian world starts with Anthony and his biography. So that's the history of Bosch's subject. Now we can talk about his medium. This is a triptych. It has 3 panels and the outer panels can close. I know how to discuss triptychs. I've done it before. It's often good to start with what appears on the outside and then consider what's on the inside. So when Bosch's painting is closed, it looks like this. 2 scenes from the life of Christ. Nothing really confusing or distracting about this. In both images, Christ can be identified kneeling. In the left image, he's being mocked by many of the characters, and notably this guy right here. And on the right panel, the mocking characters are replaced by helpful characters. Notably, this character here, Saint Veronica, who seems to parallel the mocking character to the left. Saint Veronica offered Christ a shroud to wipe his face, and as a reward, Christ gave her the true image of his face printed on that shroud. She's an interesting character to include in a painting that includes characters ripped out of a fantasy or horror novel, because she has the true image. Everything else is fiction. She has the truth. And if we open up this triptych, we may be overwhelmed at first. It's impossible to know where to look. It's an extremely busy composition with no clear focus. There's a guy trapped in a boat with feathers being ridden by a hooded rodent wearing cute booties and a white branch growing out of his butt and a sword piercing his leg while he simultaneously balances a caged monkey. You know what? Okay. I'm getting a little overwhelmed. Let's refocus. Let's move from the outside of the triptych to the inside of the triptych with more intention this time. When we open the triptych, we can see that in the same place that Christ and Veronica have their exchange of the true image on the outside, the image of Christ appears on the cave in the inside. And across from the crucifix, we can find a kneeling St. Anthony. The kneeling St. Anthony reflecting the kneeling posture of Christ from the outside panels. Okay, we've got a place to start. And honestly, we didn't need that hint from the outside panels. St. Anthony is the geometric center of the panel. He should have been easier to find, but he just wasn't. Not when that rodent exists. Okay, so now that we're grounded, we can look at the larger composition. We have 3 panels, and usually we read from left to right, so let's start on the left. On the left panel, we have what seems to be a story from the biography that I read. It's from the early part of St. Anthony's story when he first decides to leave the social world and live in isolation. He ventures off into the desert, enters a cave, and then, according to the biography, he found there a great multitude of devils that so much beat him. And they beat him so badly that he passed out and needed to be carried out of there. When he revived, he asked to be brought back to the cave, where he then called for the devils to return so that he could fight them. This left panel tells that story. St. Anthony, like a boxer brought back into the ring after a rough round, is being led back into the cave. And that cave also seems to be some sort of demon on all fours, and one enters through his backside. Gross. Focus. Okay, so that's the main action of the left side. Now, the middle, the largest and most chaotic section. As we've noted, in the geometric center, we've got St. Anthony looking right back at us. He's praying to an image of a crucifix housed in some sort of broken temple. He is, by far, the most boring part of this panel, which includes an armored fish boat with a demon gondolier, a tree person walking a pair of dogs along with some sort of fish-horse hybrid monster, and a raging fire in the background.
A little bit of everything, all of the time.
And almost hidden in the darkness and despair of all these chaotic images is their opposite, Anthony. Tranquility where the rest is hostile, humble when the rest is proud, weak where the rest seems strong, praying to a bright spot in a dark corner of a broken temple. The more time I spend with this painting, the more St. Anthony draws my attention, even if he isn't the first thing that I see. He does, given enough time and enough intention, win the battle for my attention, but it is not an easy fight. And I think that may be the point, but let's move on to the right panel. The main action of the right panel has St. Anthony, one more time, looking directly at us. This time, he's not difficult to find. Bosch paints St. Anthony as the largest figure in this panel and positions his body in the foreground. There are temptations in this panel, an undressed woman and some demons setting up for a feast, but they don't distract us from the main action as much as the previous panels. If we wanted to, we could easily be distracted by the flying fish in the sky or the faceless head that's actually a body being stabbed in its lack of face, but Anthony's portrait, free from any fantastic elements, stands out among the horrors. He's just a chill guy, reading a book, and avoiding the temptations which now seem small. If we zoom back out and we look at all 3 panels together, we can see that this is simply St. Anthony's biography. His initial retreat into the desert, his battle against devils, his own impulses and his own imagination, and then finally his self-actualization, his victory over a world that tried to break him. St. Anthony on the left panel faces right, heading toward his spiritual journey. In the center panel, St. Anthony's body language continues to face the right as he prays towards the crucifix, while his head turns towards us, looking, asking for our attention, and imploring us to keep focused. Finally, in the right panel, we see him face left, as though looking back on his journey. Good. Cool. So that's what's going on. It's the story of St. Anthony retreating into the desert, fighting off temptations and devils, and finding God. But now that we've made it this far, I think that we can go a little bit further with our analysis. I think that I might be brave enough at this point. Okay, now that we've broken this down into comprehensible chunks and understand, to some degree, what is going on, now we have to turn to the much more difficult question of why. Why imagine a world like this? What's it trying to communicate? What's the worldview? What is the nature of this particular period I? The art historian Joseph Koerner claims that Bosch is a didactic artist. His paintings, even ones that originally serve a ritual purpose, teach us a lesson. The world is sinful, an enemy territory that should be held in contempt. And yeah, I can see that. St. Anthony retreats into the desert to avoid the temptations of the social world. It's there. And that perspective, I get it. In the end, it doesn't matter if these monsters are supposed to be funny or frightening or absurd or disturbing. I don't actually need to see these visual references through Bosch's specific period eye. These fantastic creatures are distractions. They could be ridiculous or infuriating, and they'd still serve the purpose of capturing my attention. And I get that. This speaks to me. My internet feed is also filled with the absurd, the frightening, the ridiculous, the infuriating, and it's all trying to capture my attention. It's St. Anthony's attention that is under attack in his painting. My attention is also under attack. He wants to focus on serving God and navigating the hellscape that is the world. I want to stay focused on writing about medieval art and Shakespeare and navigate the hellscape that is the social internet. Bosch wants to deny himself the pleasure of food. I want to deny myself the pleasure of watching other people on TikTok cook food. The person that St. Anthony wants to be is a monk studying sacred text. The person that I want to be cooks food rather than one who watches other people make food. Somebody who makes videos rather than watches them. Somebody who tries to make the internet rather than have the internet make me. And the thing about this Bosch painting that really hits for me is that form follows function. The painting itself distracts us from its message, that there are elements of our experience that try to distract and prevent us from becoming the best versions of ourselves. We have to focus our attention and overcome our fears in order to understand the lesson that we need to take back control of our attention. It's not just St. Anthony who needs to fight off the distractions of these monsters. It's also us, standing in front of the painting. We need to look past them to find St. Anthony. As Koerner says, Bosch is a didactic artist, and his lesson is that the world itself is enemy territory, and he teaches this lesson in a variety of ways. Sometimes, like in his painting The Haywain, he shows a horde of humanity fighting over a pile of hay being pulled by monsters. He shows us people obsessed with and fighting over something that is meaningless at the very moment that they face divine judgment. And in an image like the Temptation of St. Anthony, he shows us an exemplar, somebody who has successfully avoided the temptations of the world. This painting shows the internal life of St. Anthony. All these temptations and devils exist to distract him, but he stays focused. An early commentator on Bosch's paintings, José de Sigueres, once said that most artists paint man as he appears from the outside, whereas he alone had the audacity to paint him as he is on the inside. These wild creatures are a physical representation of the way St. Anthony, and perhaps Bosch himself, viewed the world around him, filled with traps, something to avoid or endure in order to get to the reward of the afterlife. And I think I get him. I mean, I certainly love the world more than Bosch does, but I get the impulse to retreat from certain spaces because they keep me from being the person that I want to be. I think that might be why Bosch endures and continues to interest modern audiences, even if his worldview differs so dramatically from our own. Sometimes it feels like the social internet is an enemy territory that should be held in contempt, a place we should retreat from, delete our accounts, and throw away our smartphones. And yet, here I am, about to post another video, entering the backside of some unsightly cave, challenging the devils to another fight. Subscribe, I guess, or do whatever you need to do to be the person that you want to be. I need to get back to my books, cook a meal, touch grass. Thanks for watching.